segment 4 of the review of microeconomics. This is the end of consumer theory. The next one will be theory of the firm. The first thing is, or some basic concepts in consumer theory. The first topic we're going to talk about is equilibrium, why equilibrium looks the way it does. In a market, this is again a market, we're talking about perfectly competitive markets. We have a supply and demand curve. In the supply and demand curve, well, the producers and consumers interact in such a way that we establish an equilibrium, P star Q star, which is a good thing. Just as a side note, it's a good thing because, well, we have these large areas here and here, which are consumer surplus and producer surplus. But returning to our original topic, so this is a good thing. Question is, why here? Why this? Why do we have equilibrium? Why not some other price and quantity? And we've discussed that, of course, if somehow we had a price that were above equilibrium price above equilibrium price, we would see that, that quantity supplied would be larger, greater than quantity demanded. We now have a difference between quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Here at Q star, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are the same. It's a market clearing price. Every consumer, everyone who wants to purchase this at that price can and may. Every consumer, every producer who wants to sell at that price can and may. So we have then an equilibrium between the two. The other thing we can do here is when we look at this, the price above P star, we find quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. And we then have an excess supply. What happens? Well, that means that all these producers have too many goods. They'll lower the price until we finally get to P star and stop. So that's how we attend to that. The next one, what happens if we look here and we find the price is lower than P star? Price below P star? Price below P star, well, we look here and now we do the same thing we did before, except this time quantity demanded is out here. Quantity supplied is over here. Now we have quantity demanded being larger than quantity supplied, which is excess demand or shortage. If there's a shortage, if people would like to buy this more than there's adequate supply, well, there'll be competition amongst the consumers and they'll bid the price up until we finally get at P star and we stop then at equilibrium. So all things being equal, ceteris paribus, if there's no intervention in the market, we'll get to P star and stay at P star. P star or equilibrium is a situation where there is no incentive for any of the parties involved to change their situation. There's no reason to move away from equilibrium. When equilibrium is stasis, is no change. So the question is, well, and under what circumstances do we find that there's not equilibrium? And that's when the government intervenes. Now, the government may intervene for lofty reasons or foolish reasons. As economists, we only care about what happens. So, for example, we could have something like this, where we have a price that is enforced by the government higher than P star, and that's going to be called a price floor. A floor is above equilibrium price. And as we just observed, Q sub S, quantity supplied will be greater than quantity demanded. In this case, the government has to intervene and hold those stocks. That's the stocks of this commodity to do that. The result is, as we can see, well, there's a loss, there's a decrease in the quantity that's actually traded in the market. The price will go up. And this arrow-shaped block, if we drop a perpendicular here, now we start to talk about our favorite thing, which is the dead weight loss. Total loss of welfare to society. That's important. And that's a price floor that happens sometimes when producers complain to government that somehow the price in the marketplace is not adequate for them to do what they wish to do, which is really to make a certain amount of profits. Alternatively, we could see a price imposed there. A price that's imposed below equilibrium is called a price ceiling. Which one's which? Well, F in the alphabet is above C, as far as down the alphabet. So if you imagine that F is above C, the higher one's a floor, and the first one you get to, the lower one, is a ceiling. I hope that helps you remember which one's which. So a price ceiling is imposed at some price below the equilibrium price. This one is one that necessarily will benefit consumers. An example of this, the typical example, is a rent control. For example, in New York City and some other major cities, where consumers feel that rents are too high. Well, we might be at equilibrium, but people who haven't studied economics just make a value judgment and complain to their legislators. People impose a price ceiling. What happens here? We find that, we have quantity demanded is up here. Quantity supplied is less. We have excess demand. Does that make sense? Well, the price of something that people like, that we're happy to buy at this quantity, has now gone down. Wow. All these consumers, from here to here, on this part of the demand curve, who did not wish to purchase this, did not have enough utility to justify a purchase at P star. Well, the price has gone down, and now they're into the market. These people were not in the market before, now they're in the market. They'd like to have this commodity at this new controlled price with a price ceiling, but it doesn't exist. So they were content before to not buy it because it didn't have enough value. Now they're disturbed and upset because they can't buy it at the new artificially lowered price. On the other hand, we have these people who were purchasing this at that price. If we're rent control, they had an apartment at that prevailing equilibrium price, and now they don't because the quantity supplied is less. So they're upset, they were willing to buy it, now they can't get it, even though they did have a willingness to buy that was above the price. So we have two different groups of consumers that lose. This one can't buy it, didn't want it before. This one had it before and can't buy it. This total amount here is the shortage. And what we have here again, well, we see we're only producing this much, and we have, again, a deadweight loss. The result of this, well, the price goes down. The owners of this commodity, perhaps their apartments, they lose their producer surplus. You need to be able to draw that. And, well, consumers lose some quantity, and the overall quantity in the market is less. So rent controls typically favor one group over another. It can't satisfy everybody. The other thing I want to talk about very quickly is just to remind you about elasticities. So here we go, elasticities. Elasticities are all about the response of quantities. So the price elasticity of demand, the most important one that you'll see and use, has this formula. Price elasticity of demand, the percentage change in quantity or percentage change in price. Elasticities, we talk about them along a demand curve. And this is relatively elastic, relatively inelastic, and this is going to be unit elastic. And by that, what do we mean? Well, remember, this is demand curve. The marginal revenue curve will be underneath it, and where it crosses, well, that's where marginal revenue stops contributing to total revenue. This positive means that every unit has a positive marginal, contributes to total. Down here, it doesn't contribute to total. This is indifferent. If we draw this line up, we'll get to, well, what should have been unit elasticity. So at unit elasticity, the marginal revenue curve is 0 because why? This equals 1, and the gain in quantity is exactly offset the loss of the price, so there's no change in total revenue. And if this firm we're intending to maximize revenue. Remember that we really want to maximize profits most of the time, but if we're maximizing revenue, we would manufacture to that quantity. Only two other concepts to talk about? Well, that was one. That was elasticity along a curve. The next one is, do we have elasticities of curves as they rotate? This would be a perfectly inelastic demand curve. This is perfectly elastic demand curve. Here, no matter what happens to the price, the quantity is the same. It's perfectly inelastic, perfectly elastic, and we then differentiate curves according to how close they are to the slopes of the perfectly inelastic or perfectly elastic. This is going to be relatively more inelastic than this flat curve, which is elastic. I recommend you memorize these two and just then rotate the curve in the exam, or rotate the curve that you're evaluating to get some feeling about whether it's elastic or inelastic. Remember also we have price elasticity, price elasticity of supply, which is the same thing except we're talking about quantity supplied instead of quantity demanded, and those curves will have this shape, and we could rotate them also. Only other thing to know about elasticities and this is to remember that in elasticities we have different types. We have the price elasticity of demand, and then we can change the denominator to figure out what some different independent variables will do to the quantity. So we have then the cross elasticity of demand, which is percentage change of quantity of good X to percentage change in the price of good Y, the effect of a change in price on another good, and this tells us if things are complements or substitutes. And then last, income elasticity of demand, again, percentage change in quantity over percentage change in income, and that helps to identify or quantify in what way does income influence the amount that we're change in income, change the quantity that we're buying. This will tell us whether it's normal or an inferior good. And that's the end of this segment.